I've always been a very curious person about everything, and also an experimenter. I'm prepared to make those brave decisions, and jump off a cliff and see where it takes me. And that's the same with flavour. And I was always seduced, I guess, by things that were different, things that were other to what my growing up years were. To just get out there and taste it all. And if it's different, I'll give it a go.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. There have been moments, periods of time, and establishments that have changed the course of Australia's food landscape. Pioneers brave enough to adapt to change, to deliver experiences never before seen, and that help put together the building blocks of Australian cuisine. Christine Manfield is one of Australia's most influential and important chefs behind culinary icons such as Paramount, East at West, and Universal Restaurant. Christine, how are you going?
Good, thanks, Anthony. And you?
I'm good.
Good.
You had the most fortuitous luck moving away from Sydney almost just before the lockdown happened in Sydney. Can you tell us about that?
Just as we had to endure it for the first week, nervous, being total nervous Nellies, thinking, Christ, because no one had any idea of what was happening or how it unfolded, whether we'd even be able to drive out. But luckily we escaped, and it's like we live in a bit of a parallel universe up here. It's just a different reality, a different world. And I'm reminded of that every day when I talk to my friends in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, wherever, who've, had to go through some really tough times. And I've been back to Sydney a couple of times to visit. And it's just, a city's lost its soul a bit. It's going to take a long time for everyone to pull out of this.
The decision to move wasn't one as a result of COVID. It was years in the planning.
No, it wasn't that banal. But no, we'd actually made the decision a couple of years ago that it sort of felt like the right time to be being beach bums, being at the beach and still sort of engaging. I still wanted to be connected to our amazing food industry, and that's one of the main reasons we chose this particular part of the world. We wanted to stay in New South Wales. We wanted to be in warm climates because we both love the beach and the sun. So, we tend to travel places where it's warm all the time. That sort of determined it. We had a lot of friends over the last decade that have migrated north to this region. So we already knew a lot of people. I knew a lot of the food tribe anyway through the Chefy connection and also through being a judge on the Delicious Produce Awards. So I knew that there were really great farmers and artisan producers up here. So that became my focal point, I guess. And because 2020 was a year like many, many people, all my work just went out the window because a lot of it was global. And I think it actually, it was a blessing in disguise for that to happen because it meant that we could really become grounded and familiar with our new home, because it's a big move after living 32 years in a one-bedroom apartment on the harbour in Elizabeth Bay to this big house. We wanted to be able to have friends finally come and stay with us. So,
how are you coping with the space that you have now?
Oh, it's fantastic now. We're so used to space, but it's a job in itself. It's like, as Margie says, it's like looking after a house is a full-time job, and we've got 3 gardens, and I'm a bit of a green thumb, so it's allowed me to plant quite a large edible garden that we harvest from. So, that's been really good.
You mentioned that you've been to Sydney a few times, and it's a bit heartbreaking what you've seen and what's happened, and you've got friends all over the globe in food. What's it been like for you? You did lose all of your work, but being where you are, watching this happen to this industry that has been your life, tell us what it's been like the last year for you.
Yeah, I've got to say, sitting back, sitting back and gave me time to reflect and think, okay, and I hate to use the word pivot because that was such an abused word of last year, but it did allow for those that, and there are very many in our industry and others who've had to rethink and reimagine how they're going to move forward, how they're going to do business in the future. And listening to your podcast, for example, there's been so many that it's just so, I just think, inspiring to listen to those stories and to see some of the really clever things that chefs and restaurateurs have been and are doing, because there's no, going back. If you think that in your head and your mind that you're going to go back to whatever the normal was, then you're behind the eight ball. You've got to rethink. You've got to, find a whole new way and just draw on skills and I think and hospitality restaurant people have this. It's innate. Draw on your resilience and your strength.
Your influence is astounding in Australian food, and you were one of the chefs to early on to catch on to the fact that Australian cuisine is really global and an interpretation and a discussion of global cuisine. Your travels have been so important to the foundations of your career. How do you feel about travel at the moment and how important that is as a chef?
Well, it's funny, we've all had our wings severely clipped. We live in a country that where we're, sort of treated almost like children, that we're not allowed to do things. And look, I understand the whole reasoning behind it, but that can't last forever. But having said that, I mean, because we weren't able to sort of, run all over the globe, it really forced me to think, being a bit more mindful about if and when we do travel again, what the priorities really are. And also on a work front, I just thought, well, you know what? I've had 25 years of working globally, taking people, hosting small group food adventures around the world to so many countries. I just thought, you know what? I'm going to use those skills. I'm going to just turn my focus and look in my own backyard, because there's so much richness, so much, diversity here, and so many extraordinary stories to be told. And experiences to have. And I think that whole sort of focus, and it's becoming a broad sort of platform now where we're encouraging Australians to travel regionally. And this region, the Tweed region where I live, has just got so much to offer. There's so much biodiversity, wonderful sort of stories of regenerative farming, just all sorts of practices that are in place. So I just thought, I'm going to shine a light on this. So I've already hosted 2 small group sort of 5-day food adventures up here last year. Jumped onto it real fast, and they just booked out in a nanosecond with Sydney people because they're the only ones that were able to come. And I'm doing another one in June this year, which we're just about to launch. The itinerary's all done, everything's locked in. So, and hopefully that will give the people from Melbourne and Adelaide in particular who had booked on previous ones that couldn't make it, the chance to come up here because and I've changed the itinerary up a bit every time I do something. It's, there's so many people to draw on. You can't fit it all in. So it gives you the chance to come back for more. And I'm also working with a local guy who was also my the driver, and he's also conveniently a pilot, so you can do small, scenic flights. And and we're going to do little 1-day snapshots. So you come for a full day, so you start at sunrise, you finish at sunset, and just do a little sort of roam around. It's just we're calling it a farm and food trail, and it's basically going to farms. It's not restaurants. It's going to farms and getting a chance to talk to those farmers, taste their produce. Have a bit of a cruise on the river because that's essential. That really defines the Tweed region, the Tweed River, and also the whole caldera here, which is the around Wollongong, which is previously known as Mount Warning, is a pretty extraordinary landscape to be inspired by and to draw on. So those sorts of things is what I'm sort of focusing on now. I've got a tour to a 4-day adventure up to Arnhem Land in May, and another one to Flinders Ranges to Wilpena at the end of May. So both of those booked out in a day. Saying, people were just, so eager. We posted them up in November, and it was just like gone in a second. And we've already got dates set up on the website for 2022, and bookings are already flowing in for those. So it's just, goes to show that hopefully the power of regional travel.
You mentioned earlier that you're normally doing these sort of traveling explorations globally, and you've been doing them over the last year locally. Has that experience tapping in and connecting at a greater level in Australia, has that changed you as a chef and your outlook with produce?
I think so. And I think it took moving out of the city, I think, to really come to terms, to come to terms properly, really, quite deeply with using what's in your backyard, and there's chefs up here that are doing that. Like any place, there's a lot of ordinary stuff happening that sort of was always geared towards tourism or tourists on that sort of mass scale sort of level. And then those that are cooking in a very considered sort of way. I can mention Josh at Fleet and Ben at Pippet as two examples. Who just, basically work with a 50K radius. And so, and growing stuff myself. And also, I just get produce from farmers. I'm lucky to have Palissa not far away with Boonluck Farm Organics. So, just get a box every couple of weeks, and the produce is amazing. It's stuff you can't get in the shops. And there's cheese makers and just, all sorts of things. So, and I've found that I'm now on it because, like everybody, spent all last year bloody cooking at home. So it was just like, okay, what can I go out and grab from down the road? And there's little farm shops too still in this region where you just stop by the side of the road and buy, here is sweet potato territory, so you can get them for $1 a kilo or something, and it's just an honest system. You put the money in the tin and take what you need. It's that sort of stuff, and there's still that around. So I really, when I drive past one, I stop and get something, and I go to the farmers markets. So I've got two that are close by. There's 6 markets across the week that I can go to that are produce markets, farmers markets. I go to Moolumbar on Wednesday mornings and to Mullum on Friday morning.
For someone that spent a couple of decades in an apartment in the centre of Sydney, you mentioned that you're growing your own produce. What's the challenges involved in putting your hands in the soil like that?
Oh, it's, well, up here, you just, you can break something off and put it in the ground and it grows, because it's so fertile. There's rain, there's sun, there's all the, there's all the things. You don't have to, we're very fortunate that we don't live in a drought affected area. So I've been just so lucky. I mean, there's been a few sort of fails. Like I've had no luck growing decent basil, except for Thai basil I can grow, and an Indian holy basil, which is just flourishing. But the regular sort of, Italian basil, I think it's too wet, or that the seed stock that I've had or the seedlings I've had are, that's the ones that sort of just go slippery and limp and they just die off. But everything else, is fine. I just figure, well, if I know a few people with basil bushes that I can just go and, break a bit off and that gets me by. But, yeah.
There wouldn't be many people in food in Australia or that love food that wouldn't have eaten at your restaurants or know who you are. But where did it all start for you? Where did that interest in food begin? Well,
I've always been a keen cook. I left home at a very tender age of 16, so I've always had to look after myself. But it was really in my early 30s, and I was a teacher, primary school teacher in Adelaide, and decided to take long service leave, so to resign and take long service leave. And so we went and lived in Paris for a while, and that was 86. And then Margie's sister, Marianne, had bought Greymas, which is a gorgeous little B&B in Robe in South Australia, where the main crayfish port. And so she said, look, I've got a restaurant license and there's a nice dining room. Do you want to come back and cook with me? And Marianne, like myself, was a teacher and a very keen home cook. So I thought, oh, shit, why not give it a go, come back. Without any sort of, clear vision at that point. We just knew we loved, our reason for travel, we were already well-travelled. Being a teacher, I get lots of holidays, so, every holidays we were on a plane going somewhere. And so we came back and worked there for the opening of the summer season. And then Petaluma Restaurant opened in the Adelaide Hills at the Bridgewater Mill. And so I just rolled up there one day after a lunch service and said, I'd like a job, anything. I knew Kath Carey and the people working there, so bold as punch, and just said, if anything comes up, think of me. And I got a call about 3 days later, and so I started, and I worked there for 15 months. And at that time, I've got to say, in the late 80s, a lot of there were great role models in the restaurant, in the chefy world, and everyone came from another career. It was a choice rather than training from out of school. And so for me, that was my what I looked towards. If they can do it, maybe I can. And I guess that was really when it became obvious to me, working at Petaluma, that this is what I can do. As a job, as a new career, and just fell totally head over heels in love with everything about being a chef. So it sort of diminishes all the the negatives, like the crazy hours and that you work and everything else. And having known Philip Searle in Adelaide as well when he had Possums, and he had opened Oasis Seros in Sydney, and we wanted to move to Sydney. We wanted to live in a big city, having sort of spent, 10 years travelling and always being attracted to big, buzzy cities like, New York, Paris, blah, blah. We felt Adelaide, look, as cute as it is, it was just a bit small. And we wanted to dip our toes in the big pond. So, we both came to Sydney at the beginning of '88, and I worked for a short time with Anders Ausbach at the wharf, and in the early days there, and then started at Oasis, and basically for the next sort of 18 months, 2 years, I didn't really see the light of day. It was a full-scale immersion into a very refined and exciting, kitchen life, because Philip is very left of centre in his thinking, and he really became my mentor. And what I learnt in those 2 years would probably take, 10 years of anyone else, or, you have to be fortunate to have someone like that to lead you and to challenge you and teach you and direct you and, all that stuff, and just push you hard to strive for your very best. So that sort of benchmark of excellence really got instilled into me at an early pivotal sort of time in my career. So I knew that this was my life from now on. So, and then left to, and then Maggie and I started, thought we'd start business on our own. So that was 1990, middle of 1990, that we ventured out, for the first 2 years, doing a couple of dining rooms in pubs, which were sort of, I guess, these days you'd call it gastropubs, that's sort of, good food in a pub setting, which were sort of pretty on trend at that time. There were lots around in Sydney in particular. Chefs, because if you couldn't afford to, buy or, set up your own establishment, it was a really good, I guess, introduction into how to sort of, run a business at someone else's expense.
Tell us about the food of the Paragon and Phoenix, which were the pubs that you had dining rooms in. What was it like at that time, and what sort of food were you cooking?
Well, I mean, we had to cook compared to what I sort of went on to do, it was simpler. But at the same time, it wasn't pub food, it wasn't bistro food. There was that craft that I had learnt and the skills that I'd learnt. And also, I'd have to say the biggest contribution and the biggest influence was flavour from Philip, how to bring flavours and textures together. And they're the two things you have to consider when you're putting a dish together. And I think, I just had a natural or an innate palate for appreciating and understanding flavours and how they work, the synergy of how flavours work. So that sort of has always guided me in the way that I cook. There were definitely definitive dishes from that time that that have stood the test of time, and I get messages from people that still cook them, like the eggplant stack, the eggplant sandwich. Learning how to make checkerboard from Philip, which the ice cream slice, which I never repeated, but did it with different patterns. There was the slice of pride, there was splice, there was a whole, putting different flavours, fruit flavours of sorbets, combining sorbets and ice creams together and constructing them in a mould so that when you sliced it, the patterns became visible. So it's that sort of architecture of building flavours, but making it look deceptively simple.
From 1993 to 2000, you had one of Australia's most influential restaurants, and at the time a real benchmark for what Australian cuisine was at that time in Paramount. Tell us how that began and what it was like running a restaurant that was so influential on our culinary landscape.
Well, you don't sort of set yourself up to do that, but we were just fortunate that from the minute that we opened the door, it just took off in a blaze of glory. And it was, and I'd have to say the 90s, and I think all the other chefs from that time, part of my food tribe who I'm still connected with, like Neil Perry and Steve Manfredi and David Thompson, yada, yada, the list goes on, would say that they really were the most extraordinary times we all collectively developed this whole freestyle way of cooking, and everyone had brought their own personal imprint to the food, which is why we always did. And I think we still grapple with what modern Australian food is, because there are just so many different expressions of it. They were, and I think the 90s per se were a golden age in terms of everything, partying, the whole thing, and and everything just fed off each other. So it was so incredibly stimulating, and it was before the fun police stepped in and started introducing draconian laws to inhibit or take away any sort of creative expression, I think, and I'm probably being a bit harsh, but it's the landscape, the restaurant landscape changed. And I think too, by the end of the 90s and the early noughties, and with the Olympics having been here, we sort of took on, just as it happened all over the world globally, and I saw this being played out in every country with chefs I knew everywhere, the corporatisation of our industry, where corporates or money boys were buying into restaurant life and buying properties, and so the thing of being just a itty bitty restaurant owner to becoming this big time sort of entrepreneur, it was just this huge sort of leap. And that, I think that changed the face of it. We're seeing now sort of, you know, once again a growth of, you know, and support for small scale, what I call small scale, you know, privately owned business, where, you know, the chef or the restaurant owner has put their life on the line. Basically, they're not backed up by big boy money, and everything they own is there, you know, and that's what we did. You know, we always did. So it allows for greater independence. You're not having to answer to anyone about your bottom line, or you have to be very mindful of that. You know, being a restaurateur teaches you an awful lot about business, and how to, you know, being a good chef is not good enough. You've got to understand the business side of it to make it successful, you know, and how to drive it, and how to, you know, how to be able to step away and work on your business and not just in your business. And I think, you know, Paramount days, as fun as they were, you know, fantastic. When I look back on it now, compared to how I ran or how I managed Universal, compared to Paramount, with just two totally different mindsets. And I think what London, because East at West was in London, so I was actually headhunted over there to open a modern Asian restaurant in the middle of Covent Garden, and it was fantastic. It won, you know, accolades left, right and centre, and was really going off. But it was, you know, owned by a bunch of money boys who wanted to see a huge profit. They'd never invested in restaurants before and didn't appreciate or understand the nuances of the business, and that you just don't get 40% profit, you know, in a high-end restaurant, you know. Does not happen, full stop. So they ended up selling the business, and selling the building. Actually, they owned the building at the time, which is right next door to the Ivy. So I came back to Australia and knew that my job hadn't finished, my work hadn't finished, and that what I was doing there was on the right track. And so basically just use those same, I guess, business models and principles of, you know, and the way the food was evolving, and open Universal. And Universal really was, the name has nothing to do with the movies. It was about, you know, using flavours of the world. So it was like, think global, eat local was the catch cry, you know. So that's you know how and why Universal came about. And it was really, and when I opened Universal in 2007, I already had an end gaming plan in sight, you know, that I was going to finish it when I did, and so I was always working towards that. It was, and I said right from the outset, this is my swan song as a restaurateur, you know. And I still get asked, when are you doing another one? It's like, you know, what is it about? No, you don't understand.
Well, your food evolved beautifully over your career, and was very influenced by your travels, and Asia was a big part of the influence in your cuisine. What's been the real important shifts and influences to head you down that path? I
just think because, I mean, I've always been a very curious person about everything, you know, and also an experimenter. I'm prepared to make those brave decisions, and jump off a cliff, and you know, and see where it takes me. And that's the same with flavour. And I was always seduced, I guess, by things that were different, things that were other to what my growing up years were. You know, to just get out there and taste it all. And, you know, if it's different, yeah, I'll give it a go. And it was, you know, the travel really sort of, you know, was what sparked that, you know, just tasting food that was so different. The very first time we went to Thailand, it just blew my mind in the 80s. And gradually we started seeing all those ingredients available to us in the marketplace. People started growing. Chefs were demanding certain produce be grown, and, you know, and it just filtered down to the consumer level. So, you know, that's really that's really where it came from. But I didn't ever limit it to one. That was my problem. I could never limit it to one sort of, part, because since the 90s, early 90s, I've been travelling and working in India, and then that's where I sort of, cut my teeth with food tours was in India. So and I did that right up until last year, So I was going there on a private level, on a private, capacity. Also working with chefs. I did quite a few years of mentoring young chefs in different cities, and also being a guest chef in places, and then taking people travelling. So I sort of, as a country, it's something that has gone deep, into my soul.
You mentioned Philip Searle and the importance of mentors. You've become a mentor for many in the industry. What's exciting you about the next generation of chefs, and what sort of things do you tell them when you are being a mentor to so many?
Look, if they've, and there's been many that have worked with me that I have, I guess, done a background guidance, I call it. Talk your ideas through, like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Just some of the practicalities that you don't always do, and just being brave. Just be brave and get out there and do it. If faith in yourself, and one of the first questions I ask, and even for chefs that I don't mentor, but what's your point of difference in the marketplace? Why are you here? What's your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? So there are many different ways that you can sort of, become a chef or a restaurateur, and it doesn't all have to be at, my end of the market, So it's really about, if you want to open a neighbourhood bistro, okay, that's very different. That's a very different mindset to wanting to open something that's where you're cutting edge, you're, in a sense, breaking new ground, you're doing things differently, and you're offering something to people that's really a bit out there, but you're wanting to bring your diners to that experience. So they're all very different. Or doing bloody good fish and chips on the beach. They're all very different facets of the business. So you've got to, if you can't identify that in the first place, then I think you're stuck. And I see it time and again, not with people I necessarily know, but, you see restaurants open and they say they're one thing and they're trying to achieve something else, and it's not coming together, The
industry has had its toughest perhaps ever in the last year, and they're still not over all of the hurdles.
Absolutely not. No.
What do you think the impact will be on the industry, and what's some of the positives to come out of this for the industry as a whole?
Yeah, the positives I've seen are what a lot of the, as I said, you're talking about the younger generation. They're really fucking grabbing the bull by the horns and running with it in a way, and there's some fantastic stuff out there, and businesses that have remodeled. What we're seeing, I think, is a demand to consumers, to diners, that and an appreciation of how expensive it is to open your doors of a restaurant. That you have a commitment. If you make a booking, you stick to it. You don't cancel. You don't do a no-show. You should pay a set price. So that that if you've got 20 bookings or 50 bookings or whatever, you're going to get X amount of income. So it has changed the thing of a la carte as such, which I don't think is such a bad thing, because I think before Australians generally, and I'd say first world generally, were very spoilt by too much choice. And you look at a long menu and think, Christ, how can they carry that amount of produce and turn it over when you're looking around and it's not busy? It's not feasible, and it's so those sorts of changes, and a lot of chefs are doing either a set menu or a set price, and say 3-course, 4-course, whatever, and giving a little limited choice in each one, so that it's brought it in, so it's a lot tighter and it's easier for the kitchen to manage. And I don't mean easier as being in lazy, but it's really important that what you have got is the best that you can have on offer. and to have 4 things done perfectly as opposed to 20 things done okay, with not necessarily the best shelf life on it is I know where I'd go any day. So so you've seen those sorts of changes, and also the time constraint, that having to, staggering your bookings, which is a good thing, because we all got into that. We all got sort of, I guess, hijacked into that. Do you want to come at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock scenario? Because you have to have certain bums on seats to be able to make the sums work, and consumers still don't get that. And so now it's, I think, a little more flexible, where the bookings are staggered across the evening. And so you can go at 7 o'clock, but you still have a 2-hour time limit, sort of thing. And I don't think any of those things are bad. I think they've been positives that have come forward. But consumer education has certainly increased over the last year because of this. But there's a long way to drag ourselves out of it, I think, as an industry. We're still undercapitalised, we're still understaffed. Up here there are jobs going left, right and centre, from Byron up to the border. A lot of business can't open more than 3 or 4 days because they haven't got the staff. Everyone's clamouring for staff. And the big thing is there's no accommodation, because the A-listers moved in and they've pushed the rents up. You go to any rental property, one, there's a queue of 200, and secondly, they'll up the price of a rental thing by a couple of $100. So, and it's not just hospitality, it's other industries up here too that can't get the workers up here because they've got nowhere to live. And there's businesses like, I'll use Harvest as an example, that have actually got a house, and it's become staff quarters. So they can attract, because they've got a big pool of staff. So they can offer somewhere for their staff to live, and that's sort of And there's other big name, Sydney people that are moving into the Byron Shire that will probably do the same thing, because that's the only way you're going to get people to work.
You mentioned that you've been cooking a lot over the last year. Do you have any go-to dishes that you've really loved cooking over that period of time that sort of speaks of the way you're cooking these days?
Well, really, I mean, here it's there's seafood and there's vegetables. I've done a lot of vegetable cooking, and I just make shit up. What have I got? What have I got? And Margie has kept a record, a photographic record. She photographs every dish. We tend to have one main thing a day, early evening, and so she's photographed it, and often she doesn't post it, she just sends it to a few friends, friends that have come up to visit, or ones that she just wants to Skype to. Look what I'm having, sort of thing. And it's just regular everyday cooking. There's nothing fancy pants about it, but it just comes back to that flavour. And friends go, oh, can I have that recipe? It's like, well, I just made it up. Really, do you want me to sit down and write it out? So there's not one particular thing. Once a week we'll have, because I get great farm eggs, we'll have, red rice with, chilies and stuff through it, and condiments, and eggs on top. It's sort of like really a breakfast food, but it's something when you just don't be bothered. That's our go-to comfort dish.
The last year has seen a major upheaval to most people's lives. What are you most looking forward to on the other side of this? Well,
I think just continuing on what I sort of, in a way, started last year, and that was, working, sort of to promote and to champion regions, and it's not just my region, but that's where it all starts. I went up and did a weekend in Glen Innes last week at their show, which is so cute. It took me right back to the 50s. It was just like a time warp. But they under the big top, under the marquee, they had the gourmet fiesta. It was a 2-day event, and so I did. I was it. I did cooking classes, demonstrations, and tastings and stuff. And so once again, just really showing people, I guess, what's on our back doorstep, what we can use locally, and it's just driving in that message constantly, because you just have to go to the supermarket and get dismayed at what people do, So I just did things like, these are the local cheeses made around here. This is ways you can cook with them or, serve them. Then I did, one on native produce and how to integrate, those flavours, which are big and bold and punchy. And I've started doing a lot of that in my cooking here. That's been one major shift. And also, as to digress for a second, when we got up here, I was really lucky to meet a local Minyinbul woman who is a force of nature, and her mob are called Curry Country, and there's about 3,000 in their mob, and they live just up the road, and so she's very connected to food culture as well, and so we've become great mates. And so her and her family did a welcome ceremony, a smoking ceremony for us in our garden when we moved in. So we're now we're on country with them. So I'm very mindful of that and incorporating that into my work, and so that feeds through to having a cultural immersive experience with any guests that come up here with them, because it's it's really part of we have to make it part of our story, part of our history, and bring that forward. So that's been an extraordinary life experience to have happen, and so that goes with me wherever I am and whatever I'm doing. And there's other things coming up this year, like I'm speaking at the Regionality. It's a group that started up in this part a couple of years ago about regenerative farming, and they're having a conference, although they call it an exchange. It's called Farm to Plate Exchange, and it's a 2-day event up in the Scenic Rim, which is just over the border in Queensland, in May. And so it's headlined by Bruce Pascoe and Charlie Massey and other people that have really sort of put the importance of farming, valuing our soil, bringing in Indigenous wisdom into the way we practice farming, and that carries right through to what we put on the plate. So and that's where my little part will come in, and what I'll be speaking about there. So there's things like I guess I've purposely looked at things that are not in the city. So the couple of times that I came back to Sydney, I came down to work with Marty Boats up at Cook Shed on the Hawkesbury. So I consider that a bit rural. And I love working with Marty, and it's such a fulfilling, it always has been a very fulfilling experience to be able to cook in a very relaxed, laid back sort of way with what he's got around his farms there. And just have, it's essentially mostly Sydney people that drive up for the day to have lunch in the shed.
Well, Christine, as always, it's extraordinary to catch up with you, and we're honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds today. Really looking forward to seeing the further adventures that you have throughout Australia. Unbelievable stuff. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Exactly. I'm not done yet. I'll still be around for a while. So
Good.
There's more work to be done.
Amazing. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Anthony.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.